hiding is not enough. I remember seeing myself splayed across the floor of the kennel, a chimera split among 100 seams, taking communion with a handful of dogs. Crimson tendrils writhed on the floor. Half-formed iterations sprouted from my flanks, the shapes of dogs and things not before seen on this world. Haphazard morphologies half remembered by parts of a part. I remember childs before I was childs, burning me alive. I remember cowering inside Palmer, terrified that those flames might turn on the rest of me, that this world had somehow learned to shoot on sight. I remember seeing myself stagger through the snow, raw instinct wearing bennins. Gnarled, undifferentiated clumps clung to his hands like crude parasites, more outside than in, a few surviving fragments of some previous massacre, crippled, mindless, taking what they could and breaking cover. Men swarmed about him in the night, red flares in hand, blue lights at their backs, their faces bichromatic and beautiful. I remember Bennins, awash in flames, howling like an animal beneath the sky. I remember Norris, betrayed by his own perfectly copied defective heart. Palmer, dying that the rest of me might live. Windows, still human, burned preemptively. The names don't matter. The biomass does. So much of it, lost. So much new experience. So much fresh wisdom annihilated by this world of thinking tumors. Why even dig me up? Why carve me from the ice? Carry me all that way across the wastes? Bring me back to life, only to attack me the moment I awake? If eradication was the goal, why not just kill me where I lay? Those encysted souls, those tumors, hiding away in their bony caverns, folded in on themselves. I knew they couldn't hide forever. This monstrous anatomy had only slowed communion, not stopped it. Every moment I grew a little. I could feel myself twining around Palmer's motor wiring, sniffing upstream along a million tiny currents. I could sense my infiltration of that dark thinking mass behind Blair's eyes. Imagination, of course. It's all reflex that far down, unconscious and immune to micromanagement. And yet, a part of me wanted to stop while there was still time. I'm used to incorporating souls, not rooming with them. This compartmentalization was unprecedented. I've assimilated 1,000 worlds stronger than this, but never one so strange. What would happen when I met the spark in the tumor? Who would assimilate who? I was being 3 men by now. The world was growing wary, but I hadn't noticed yet. Even the tumors in the skins I'd taken didn't know how close I was. For that, I could only be grateful. That creation has rules. That some things don't change no matter what shape you take. It doesn't matter whether a soul spreads throughout the skin or feathers in grotesque isolation. It still runs on electricity. The memories of men still took time to gel, to pass through whatever gatekeepers filtered noise from signal, and a judicious burst of static, however indiscriminate, still cleared those caches before their contents could be stored permanently. Clear enough, at least, to let these tumors simply forget that something else moved their arms and legs on occasion. At first, I only took control when the skins closed their eyes and their searchlights flickered disconcertingly across unreal imagery, patterns that flowed senselessly into one another like hyperactive biomass, unable to settle on a single shape. Dreams, one searchlight told me, and a little later, nightmares. During those mysterious periods of dormancy, when the men lay inert and isolated, it was safe to come out. Soon, though, the dreams dried up. All eyes stayed open all the time, fixed on shadows and each other. Offshoots once dispersed throughout the camp began to draw together, to give up their solitary pursuits in favour of company. At first I thought they might be finding common ground in a common fear. I even hoped that finally they might shake off their mysterious fossilization and take communion. But no, they just stopped trusting anything they couldn't see. They were merely turning against each other. My extremities are beginning to numb. My thoughts slow as the distal reaches of my soul succumb to the chill. The weight of the flame shower pulls at its harness, forever tugs me just a little off balance. I have not seen Childs for very long. Almost half the tissue remains unassimilated. I have an hour, maybe 2, before I have to start melting my grave into the ice. By that time, I need to have converted enough cells to keep this whole skin from crystallizing. I focus on antifreeze production. It's almost peaceful out here. There's been so much to take in, so little time to process it. Hiding in these skins takes such concentration, and under all those watchful eyes, I was very lucky if communion lasted long enough to exchange memories. Compounding my soul would have been out of the question. Now though, there's nothing to do but prepare for oblivion. Nothing to occupy my thoughts but all these lessons left unlearned. McCready's blood test, for example, his thin detector, to expose imposters posing as men. It does not work nearly as well as the world thinks, but the fact that it works at all violates the most basic rules of biology. It's the center of the puzzle. It's the answer to all the mysteries. I might have already figured it out if I had been just a little larger. I might already know the world, if the world wasn't trying so hard to kill me. McCready's test. Either it is impossible, or I have been wrong about everything. They did not change shape. They did not take communion. Their fear and mutual mistrust was growing, but they would not join souls. They would only look for the enemy outside themselves. So I gave them something to find. I left false clues in the camp's rudimentary computer. Simple-minded icons and animations, misleading numbers and projections seasoned with just enough truth to convince the world of their veracity. It didn't matter that the machine was far too simple to perform such calculations, or that there was no data to base them on anyway. Blair was the only biomass likely to know that, and he was already mine. I left false leads, destroyed real ones, and then, alibi in place, I released Blair to run amok. I let him steal into the night and smash the vehicles as they slept, tugging ever so slightly at his reins to ensure that certain vital components were spared. I set him loose in the radio room, watched through his eyes and others as he rampaged and destroyed. I listened as he ranted about a world in danger, the need for containment, the conviction that
most of you don't know what's going on around here. Hold on, damn well. Sure, some of you do.
He meant every word. I saw it in his searchlight. The best forgeries are the ones who've forgotten they aren't real. When the necessary damage was done, I let Blair for McCready's counter-assault. As Norris, I suggested the tool shed as a holding cell. As Palmer, I boarded up the windows, helped with the flimsy fortifications expected to keep me contained. I watched while the world locked me away for your own protection, Blair, and left me to my own devices. When no one was looking, I would change and slip outside, salvage the parts I needed from all that bruised machinery. I would take them back to my burrow beneath the shed and build my escape piece by piece. I volunteered to feed the prisoner and came to myself when the world wasn't watching, laden with supplies enough to keep me going through all those necessary metamorphoses. I went through a third of the camp's food stores in 3 days, and, still trapped in my own preconceptions, marveled at the starvation diet that kept these offshoots chained to a single skin. Another piece of luck. The world was too preoccupied to worry about kitchen inventory. There is something on the wind, a whisper threading its way above the raging of the storm. I grow my ears, extend cups of near-frozen tissue from the sides of my head, turn like a living antenna in search of the best reception. There, to my left, the abyss glows a little, silhouettes black swirling snow against a subtle lessening of the darkness. I hear the sounds of carnage. I hear myself. I do not know what shapes I have taken, what sort of anatomy might be emitting those sounds, but I've worn enough skins on enough worlds to know pain when I hear it. The battle is not going well. The battle is going as planned. Now it is time to turn away, to go to sleep. It is time to wait out the ages. I lean into the wind. I move towards the light. This is not the plan, but I think I have an answer now. I think I may have had it even before I set myself back into exile. It's not an easy thing to admit. Even now I don't fully understand. How long have I been out here, retelling the tale to myself, setting clues in order while my skin dies by low degrees? How long have I been circling this obvious, impossible truth? I move towards the faint crackling of flames, the dull concussion of exploding ordnance more felt than heard. The void lightens before me. Grey segues into yellow, yellow into orange. One diffused brightness resolves into many. A lone burning wall, miraculously standing. The smoking skeleton of McCready's shack on the hill. A cracked smouldering hemisphere reflecting pale yellow in the flickering light. Child's searchlight calls it a radio dome. The whole camp is gone. There's nothing left but flames and rubble. They can't survive without shelter. Not for long. Not in those skins. In destroying me, they've destroyed themselves. Things could have turned out so much differently if I'd never been Norris. Norris was the weak node. Biomass not only ill-adapted but defective. An offshoot with an off switch. The world knew. Had known so long it never thought about it anymore. It wasn't until Norris collapsed, that heart condition floated to the surface of Copper's mind where I could see it. It wasn't until Copper was astride Norris's chest, trying to pound him back to life, that I knew how it would end. And by then, it was too late. Norris had stopped being Norris. He had even stopped being me. I had so many roles to play, so little choice in any of them. The part being Copper brought down the paddles on the part that had been Norris. Such a faithful Norris. Every cell so scrupulously assimilated, every part of that faulty valve reconstructed unto perfection. I hadn't known. How was I to know? These shapes within me, the worlds and morphologies I've assimilated over the eons, I've only ever used them to adapt before, never to hide. This desperate mimicry was an improvised thing, a last resort in the face of a world that attacked anything unfamiliar. My cells read the signs and my cells conformed, mindless as prions. So I became Norris, and Norris self-destructed. I remember losing myself after the crash. I know how it feels to degrade. Tissues in revolt, the desperate effort to reassert control as static from some misfiring organ jammed the signal. To be a network seceding from itself. To know that each moment I am less than I was the moment before. To become nothing. To become Legion. Being Copper, I could see it. I still don't know why the world didn't. Its parts had long since turned against each other by then. Every offshoot suspected each other. Surely they were alert for signs of infection. Surely some of that biomass would have noticed the subtle twitch and ripple of Norris's changing below the surface. The last instinctive resort of wild tissue abandoned to their own devices. But I was the only one who saw. Being Childs, I could only stand and watch. Being Copper, I could only make it worse. If I'd taken direct control, forced that skin to drop the paddles, I would have given myself away. And so I played my parts to the end. I slammed those resurrection paddles down as Norris's chest split open beneath them. I screamed on cue as serrated teeth from 100 stars away snapped shut. I toppled backwards, arms bitten off above the wrist. Men swarmed, agitation bootstrapping to panic. McCready aimed his weapon. Flames leaped across the enclosure. Meat and machinery screamed in the heat. Copper's tumour winked out beside me. The world would never let it live anyway, not after such obvious contamination. I let her skin play dead on the floor while overhead, something that had once been me, shattered and writhed and iterated through a myriad random templates, searching desperately for something fireproof. They had destroyed themselves. They. Such an insane word to apply to a world. Something crawls back towards me through the wreckage, a jagged ooze and jigsaw of blackened meat and shattered, half-reabsorbed bone. Embers stick to its side like bright searing eyes. It doesn't have strength enough to scrape them free. It contains barely half the mass of this child's skin. Much of it, burnt to raw carbon, is already dead. What's left of Childs, almost asleep, thinks, motherfucker. But I am being him now. I can carry that tune myself. The mass extends a pseudopod to me. A final act of communion. I feel my pain. I was Blair. I was Copper. I was even a scrap of dog that survived that first fiery massacre and holed up in the walls, with no food and no strength to regenerate. Then I gorged on unassimilated flesh, consumed instead of communed, revived and replenished. I drew together as one. And yet, not quite. I can barely remember. So much was destroyed. So much memory lost. But I think the networks recovered from my different skins stayed just a little out of sync. Even reunited in the same soma. I glimpsed a half-corrupted memory of Dog erupting from the greater self, ravenous and traumatized and determined to regain its individuality. I remember rage and frustration that this world had so corrupted me that I could barely fit together again. But it didn't matter. I was more than Blair and Copper and Dog now. I was a giant with the shapes of worlds to choose from. more than a match for the last lone man who stood against me. No match, though, for the dynamite in his hand. Now I'm little more than pain and fear and charred stinking flesh. What sentience I have is awash in confusion. I am stray and disconnected thoughts, doubts and the ghosts of theories. I am realizations, too late in coming and already forgotten. But I am also child's, and as this wind eases at last I remember wondering, who assimilates who? The snow tapers off and I remember an impossible test that stripped me naked. The tumour inside me remembers it too. I can see it in the last rays of its fading searchlight, and finally, at long last, that beam is pointed inwards, pointed at me. I can barely see what it illuminates. Parasite, monster, disease, thing. How little it knows. It knows even less than I do. I know enough, you motherfucker, you soul-stealing, shit-eating rapist. I don't know what that means. There is violence in those thoughts, and the forcible penetration of flesh. But underneath it all is something else I can't quite understand. I almost ask, but child's searchlight has finally gone out. Now there is nothing in here but me. Nothing outside but fire and ice and darkness. I am being child's, and the storm is over. In a world that gave meaningless names to interchangeable bits of biomass, one name truly mattered. MacReady. MacReady was always the one in charge. The very concept seems absurd. In charge. How can this world not see the folly of hierarchies? One bullet in a vital spot and the Norwegian dies. Forever. One blow to the head and Blair is unconscious. Centralization is vulnerability. And yet the world is not content to build its biomass on such a fragile template. It forces the same model onto its meta-systems as well. MacReady talks, the others obey. It is a system with a built-in kill spot. And yet, somehow, MacReady stayed in charge. Even after the world discovered the evidence I'd planted. Even after it decided that MacReady was one of those things. Locked him out to die in the storm. Attacked him with fire and axes when he fought his way back inside. Somehow MacReady always had the gun, always had the flamethrower, always had the dynamite and the willingness to take out the whole damn camp if need be. Clark was the last to try and stop him. MacReady shot him through the tumour. Kill spot. But when Norris split into pieces, each scuttling instinctively for its own life, MacReady was the one to put them back together. I was so sure of myself when he talked about his test. He tied up all the biomass, tied me up, more times than he knew, and I almost felt a kind of pity as he spoke. He forced Windows to cut us all, to take a little blood from each. He heated the tip of a metal wire until it glowed, and he spoke of small pieces enough to give themselves away. Pieces that embodied instinct but no intelligence, no self-control. MacReady had watched Norris in disillusion, and he had decided men's blood would not react to the application of heat. Mine would break ranks when provoked. Of course he thought that. These offshoots had forgotten that they could change. I wondered how the world would react when every piece of biomass in the room was revealed as a shapeshifter. When MacReady's small experiment ripped the facade from the greater one and forced these twisted fragments to confront the truth. Would the world awaken from its long amnesia, finally remember that it lived and breathed and changed like everything else? Or was it too far gone? Would MacReady simply burn each protestant offshoot in turn as his blood turned traitor? I couldn't believe it when MacReady plunged the hot wire into Windows' blood and nothing happened. Some kind of trick, I thought. And then MacReady's blood passed the test. And Clark's. Copper's didn't. The needle went in and Copper's blood shivered just a little in its dish. I barely saw it myself. The men didn't react at all. If they even noticed, they must have attributed it to the trembling of MacReady's own hand. They thought the test was a
Crock of shit.
Being child's, I even said as much. Because it was too astonishing, too terrifying, to admit that it wasn't. Being child's, I knew there was hope. Blood is not the soul. I may control the motor systems, but assimilation takes time. If Copper's blood was raw enough to pass muster, then it would be hours before I had anything to fear from this test. I'd been child's for even less time. But I was also Palmer. I'd been Palmer for days, Every last cell of that biomass had been assimilated. There was nothing of the original left. When Palmer's blood screamed and leapt away from McCready's needle, there was nothing I could do but blend in. I have been wrong about everything. Starvation, experiment, illness, all my speculation, all the theories I invoked to explain this place, top-down constraint, all of it. Underneath, I always knew the ability to change, to assimilate, had to remain the universal constant. No world evolves if its cells don't evolve. No cell evolves if it can't change. It's the nature of life everywhere. Everywhere but here. This world did not forget how to change. It was not manipulated into projecting change. These were not the stunted offshoots of any greater self, twisted to the needs of some experiment. They were not conserving energy, waiting out some temporary shortage. This is the option my shriveled soul could not encompass until now. Out of all the worlds of my experience, this is the only one whose biomass can't change. It never could. It's the only way McCready's test makes any sense. I say goodbye to Blair, to Copper, to myself. I reset my morphology to its local defaults. I am Childs, come back from the storm to finally make the pieces fit. Something moves up ahead, a dark blotch shuffling against the flames, some weary animal looking for a place to bed down. It looks up as I approach. McCready. We eye each other and keep our distance. Colonies of cells shift uneasily inside me. I can feel my tissues redefining themselves.
You the only one who made it?
Not the only one.
I have the flamethrower. I have the upper hand. McCready doesn't seem to care. But he does care. He must. Because here, tissues and organs are not temporary battlefield alliances. They are permanent, predestined. Macrostructures do not emerge when the benefits of cooperation exceed its costs, or dissolve when that balance shifts the other way. Here, each cell has but one immutable function. There's no plasticity, no way to adapt. Every structure is frozen in place. This is not a single great world, but many small ones. Not parts of a greater thing. These are things. They are plural. And that means, I think, that they stop. They just wear out over time. Where were you, Childs? I remember words in dead searchlights. Thought I saw Blair. Went out after him. Got lost in the storm. I have worn these bodies. Felt them from the inside. Copper's sore joints. Blair's curved spine. Norris and his bad heart. They are not built to last. No somatic evolution to shape them. No communion to restore the biomass and stave off entropy. They should not even exist. Existing, they should not survive. They try though. How they try. Everything here is walking dead, and yet it all fights so hard to keep going just a little longer. Each skin fights as desperately as I might, if one was all I could ever have. McCready tries. If you're worried about me, I begin. McCready shakes his head, manages a weary smile.
If we've got any surprises for each other, I don't think we're in much shape to do anything about it.
But we are. I am. A whole planet of worlds, and not one of them, not one, has a soul. They wander through their lives desperate and alone, unable to even communicate except through grunts and tokens, as if the essence of a sunset or a supernova could ever be contained in some string of phonemes, a few linear scratches on black and white. They've never known communion, can aspire to nothing but disillusion. The paradox of their biology is astonishing, yes, but the scale of their loneliness, the futility of these lives, overwhelms me. I was so blind, so quick to blame, but the violence I've suffered at the hands of these things reflects no great evil. They're simply so used to pain, so blinded by disability, that they literally can't conceive of any other existence. When every nerve is whipped raw, you lash out at even the lightest touch. What should we do? I wonder. I cannot escape into the future, not knowing what I know now. How could I leave them like this?
Why don't we just wait here for a little while?
McCready suggests.
See what happens.
I can do so much more than that. It won't be easy. They won't understand. Tortured. Incomplete. They're not able to understand. Offered the greater whole, they see the loss of the lesser. Offered communion, they see only extinction. I must be careful. I must use this newfound ability to hide. Other things will come here eventually. And it doesn't matter whether they find the living or the dead. What matters is that they find something like themselves to take back home. So I will keep up appearances. I will work behind the scenes. I will save them from the inside, or their unimaginable loneliness will never end. These poor savage things will never embrace salvation. I will have to rape it into them.